The realm. Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. A story we agreed to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back for another Game of Thrones video. Alright, my friends, I am finally getting back to my own version of Game of Thrones Season 9. As I'm sure most of you know by now, I have been writing my own season of Game of Thrones. I thought I would throw out some ideas about what could happen if HBO ever decided to make another season based on how things ended in the show. I have already wrote 5 episodes so far, but it has been a few weeks since I released my last episode. I do want to apologize for taking such a long break. As you all know, there has been a lot of news regarding House of the Dragon. Since I had to make so many videos about all the new information that was coming out, I had to set this idea aside. Then, before I knew it, a week went by, and then another week went by. Now I want to get back in this because I do want to see it through. So, let's jump into my next episode of my version of Game of Thrones Season 9. Shall we begin? The name of this episode is The Kingsguard. In the very first scene of this episode, we are back below the ground, somewhere in the north of Westeros. There are several lights flickering in the distance as 7 shadows move ahead. The roots of the weirwood that are running along the ceiling are thicker here. The red sap-like substance that was dripping down from them is now frozen in the shape of icicles. It looks like there are 1,000 bloody knives hanging upside down like bats. The scene begins as we see Jon, Ghost, Tormund, Howland Reed, and the Stark guardsmen Sansa had sent through the secret passageway in Winterfell's crypt. Jon's albino direwolf is still leading the way. When he looks back at Jon, his blood-red eyes glisten in the light. Howland Reed checks to make sure the long item he has been carrying on his back is still wrapped up in the furs. After he secures it again, he slings it back over his other shoulder. "How did you get down here?" asks Jon. "Where did my sister want you to go?" The commander of the Stark guardsmen says, "We got here through Winterfell's crypt. Queen Sansa wanted us to find out where this ended. We had been searching down here for what felt like a fortnight. We ran out of food yesterday. We're lucky we ran into you when we did." "I don't understand," says Jon. "How did you get here through Winterfell's crypt?" "We found a secret passageway," says the commander of the Stark guardsmen. "The lowest level of your family's crypt had been collapsed. After we moved all the dirt and rubble, we found a hidden tunnel that led out into here." Jon looks at Howland Reed and asks him, "The children of the forest?" Howland Reed begins nodding his head in agreement. "That's not all we found," says the commander of the Stark guardsmen. "There are some bizarre drawings on the wall as well." "Drawings?" asks Jon. "What were they?" "We will show you in a minute," says the Stark guardsman. "We're just about there." Before they take another step forward, Howland sets his hand on Jon's shoulder, then says, "I know you want to see your sister, but we can't stay here long. We must go south right away." "I understand," says Jon. That's when Ghost vanishes into the darkness that lies ahead. After they walk another 100 feet, the Stark guardsman says, "It's this way." He holds up his light higher, revealing the hidden passageway that's on the left. When the 6 men enter, they see the small, bright red eyes of Ghost up ahead. The icy floor beneath their feet begins cracking softly as they move forward. The direwolf is now sitting down as its eyes study the wall beside him. As Jon gets closer, he says, "What is it, boy? What do you see?" When Jon holds up his own light, he sees the drawings that were left on the wall thousands of years ago. He sees a man standing in front of a castle that looks a lot like Winterfell, only much smaller. He sees a giant weirwood surrounded by a grove of more weirwoods that are all facing inward. He then sees a child of the forest, holding the head of what looks like another child of the forest. The commander of the Stark guardsmen says Queen Sansa was wondering what these drawings meant. The Maester sent sketches of them down to the Citadel, but as far as I know, there has been no response. He then looks at Jon and says, "Do any of you know what they mean? Why would the children of the forest behead one of their own?" Jon looks at Howland Reed, who doesn't say anything right away. He grabs the long item from his back, then slings it over his other shoulder. After sucking in a deep breath, Howland looks in the commander's eyes, then says, "We all have to make our sacrifices." He then looks away, while wiping the tears away from his own eyes. Jon doesn't want to ask him any further questions. He can see that the Lord is visibly shaken. He shifts his focus back at the Stark guardsmen. "Let's go find my sister," says Jon. As the men enter the lowest level of the crypt, Jon notices Ghost is now sitting in front of a statue. When Jon walks over near him, he says, "I always wondered what was down here. I have never been on this level before, but I've seen it in my dreams." He holds up the light again, now shining it on the face made of stone. He examines the man's features for a few moments. A sense of dread washes over Jon before he looks away from the statue's stern face. He looks very familiar, Jon says nervously. Well, he should, says Tormund Giantsbane. He's a Stark, just like you. Jon starts looking behind the statue after he notices it's been broken. This is when Howland Reed says, "He's not in there, Jon Snow." This wasn't just any Stark. This is Brandon Stark, the first Stark of Winterfell, who was the old King of Winter. You're right, says Jon. There isn't anyone inside the statue, but I think there is something laying at the bottom of it. Here, hold this light, Jon says to one of the Stark guardsmen. He reaches down inside of the broken statue, then grabs what was left behind. The frost has it frozen and stiff, but the icy black leather still shines under the flame. Jon unfolds it, then he holds it up for all to see. It's a cloak made of black leather and black fur. Jon's eyes open wide when he suddenly realizes what it is. I've been looking at those all of my life, says Tormund Giantsbane. That's from the Night's Watch. It is, says Jon, who is now looking over at Howland Reed again. When I was leaving for the Wall, my father... Jon stops, then corrects himself. When I was leaving for the Wall, Lord Eddard said, the Starks have been manning the Wall for thousands of years.
It was great honor serving in the Night's Watch. The Starks have manned the wall for thousands of years.
I wonder when this Brandon Stark was there. A very long time ago, says Howland Reed. Roughly 8,000 years ago, Brandon Stark was the Lord Commander, just like you. He then looks into the eyes of the statue's stern face. The scene ends after Howland Reed says, he was the 13th Lord Commander of the Night Fort, Jon Snow. In the next scene, we are back in the south, right outside of the castle walls of Storm's End. The sun is shining, the sky is blue, and black wings and white eyes are seen circling above. Suddenly, the raven lets out a loud shriek as it falls from the sky. When the bird slams into the earth, its black feathers go flying back up into the air. We see a foot step onto the raven, before we see a hand yank an arrow free from the fallen bird. It's Arya Stark, who smiles at Gendry as she sees him walking over with a few horses. I don't want any ravens following us, says Arya. I will shoot down as many as I can, but will you relay the same message to your men? Have them shoot down any ravens they see. I think it would be best if Bran doesn't know when we will arrive. I will, my lady, says Gendry. And stop calling me my lady, Arya says stubbornly. Gendry laughs and says, I'm sorry. Old habits are hard to break. My men are mounted and ready. Shall we leave? Arya gives a head nod, then says, we shall. Gendry hands over the reins to a brown stallion before climbing on the back of his own. Right over their shoulders is a very large formation of men following behind them. There's maybe 500 or fewer. This is where the King's Road begins. The banners of House Baratheon are flapping hard in the wind. This certainly isn't the first time a member from House Stark and a member from House Baratheon went down this road as they made their way to King's Landing in hopes of bringing back some sort of balance to the realm. Gendry looks over at Arya as they ride side by side on their horses. He says, before we left King's Landing, you said you were leaving Westeros and sailing west. I wasn't sure if I would ever see you again. I know these aren't the best circumstances, but I'm glad you're here. So am I, says Arya, while smiling. What should I do when we arrive in the capital, asks Gendry. What's your strategy? Will we storm the gates? Will we take over the city like our fathers before us? No, says Arya. Well, then good, says Gendry, because we don't have the numbers for all that. I will simply demand to speak to the king, says Arya. I still don't actually know if it was Bran who sent the assassin to kill me. I have to keep reminding myself that the man who attacked me might have been lying. If only the raven wasn't following me. I know that's Bran, watching over me, spying on my every move, but I just don't understand why. It sounds like your brother may look at you as a threat, says Gendry. Arya flashes a look of doubt Gendry's way. She says, why would you say something like that? Well, says Gendry, you did kill the Night King, and Bran had a front row seat. He knows exactly what you're capable of. That still doesn't explain why my brother would feel threatened by me, says Arya. We weren't enemies. I had no reason to fight him. Gendry looks in Arya's eyes. An ominous feeling washed over him as he says, you're right, Arya. You had no reason to fight him, but now you do. The scene ends after he says, I just hope you don't get me killed. In the following scene, we go back to King's Landing to see how things are unraveling there. The sun is sitting high in the sky, overlooking the Red Keep and the city below. There is still a large crowd gathered right outside of the castle's walls. The atmosphere in King's Landing is charged with electricity again. Everyone is abuzz. now that they're wondering how and why the new Master of Coin went flying from the balcony of the King's chambers. As you can imagine, rumors are already beginning to spread across the capital. Brienne and Podrick are outside together, still gathering as much information as they can. We hear one man say, he heard that the little imp had Bronn killed after fighting over an old debt that he owed. We hear a different man say, he heard Bronn jump because he was heartbroken. Brienne immediately rolls her eyes. She did not know Bronn well, but she does know that would be the last thing that would ever happen. We then hear an old woman say, she heard 1,000 ravens lifted him up into the sky, then dropped him on his head. I think we've heard enough for one day, Brienne says sarcastically. Thank you for the information. We will inform the king. Brienne then glances over at Sir Podrick and says, let's go back inside. As they head for the castle's gate, they are suddenly approached by another man who has a hood down low over his face. When he gets within a few feet of them, he holds out his fist. Brienne grabs the hilt of her sword, ready for action, but the unknown man opens his hand, dropping a crumbled note at their feet before walking off. Brienne grabs the letter from the ground, then opens it. When she looks over for the hooded man, she notices he has already vanished behind the crowd. She looks at Podrick, who is just as confused as she is. Brienne looks back down at the letter, then reads it aloud. It states, the answers you are looking for lie in the hands of your hand. This doesn't make any sense, says Brienne. The only thing in my hand is this letter. She crumbles the note in her fist, then drops it onto the ground and walks away. Wait, says Sir Podrick, who is already grabbing the letter and opening it again. He starts mumbling the words to himself. The answers you are looking for lie in the hands of your hand. It's just a stupid riddle. Let's go, Brienne says angrily. This is when Podrick says we can go, but we must find Lord Tyrion right away. They walk inside the Red Keep. As they make their way across the throne room, dozens of ravens begin shrieking over and over again. Right where the Iron Throne used to sit, there must be 100 ravens gathered around in a circle, looking at something on the ground. When they get closer to the steps, they notice there is some blood on the floor. There is even some blood dripping down the steps. Some of the ravens begin flying away when they hear Brienne walking up the stairs. That's when she realizes they are feasting on something. The sound of Brienne unsheathing her sword makes all of the ravens fly away at once. There is a lifeless body lying on the ground. She looks over at Podrick in disgust. Unfortunately, the ravens have left this man's face unrecognizable. Even his eyes are missing. The one thing she does notice is the man is dressed in rags that are soaked in blood. His ragged clothes are the only thing he has left, but it doesn't help them identify who the man was. Follow me, says Brienne, as she walks away with urgency. They move down the hallway before they ascend the flight of stairs that lead to the Hand of the King's chambers. When they reach Lord Tyrion's door, Brienne knocks on it loudly. The door must not have been locked or fully shut because it slowly starts to open. As they step inside, they immediately realize Lord Tyrion isn't here. However, someone has recently been in this room. Everything is a mess. The bed has been knocked over and flipped upside down. The feathers that were inside his bedding are scattered all across the room, and everything that was inside the dressers have been spilled out onto the floor. Someone has been in here looking for something, says Brienne. His chambers did not look like this the night we heard Bronn scream through the open window. What scream? A deep voice says from behind. When Brienne and Podrick look back at the door, they see there are now 3 men standing there watching them. Brienne recognizes the men. They're leftovers from the Stark's household guard. They're the same 3 men who arrested Lord Tyrion Lannister inside Bran's chambers. Brienne says, "Where did you get that armor?" The men smile at each other before one of them says, "We are now sworn brothers of the Kingsguard thanks to your grace. He gave us our white cloaks, then commanded us to find you. We will need you to come with us. He's waiting for both of you in his chambers." Everything inside Brienne is screaming at her to grab her sword. She doesn't trust these men, and she knows it's written all over her face. She looks over at Podrick, who is hesitating as well. "After you, my lady," says one of the Stark men while stepping aside. The scene ends as they reluctantly follow the men out of Lord Tyrion Lannister's chamber. In the next scene, we are somewhere out at sea. It begins with us seeing an enormous shadow flying over a fleet of ships. Drogon's black scales are shining like obsidian under the morning sun. The dragon swoops down low over the sails as he begins gliding over the water below. Daenerys steps out onto the deck of one of R'hllor's ships. She leans against the railing before she looks out over the deep blue sea all around them. Dany smiles when she looks at Drogon, who seems to be bigger and stronger than ever. Right over her shoulder are dozens of more ships. Some of them are flying the banners of the three-headed dragon, while the bulk of them are displaying the banners of the Fiery Heart. All 1,000 slave soldiers from the Fiery Hand are sailing with them, as well as many other followers and high-ranking members of R'hllor. Grey Worm suddenly appears from below the deck. When he spots Daenerys leaning against the railing, he walks over to her. He has vowed to never leave her side again. The rest of the Unsullied men are on Dany's old ships, following right behind them as they make their way back to Westeros. "Thank you for joining me," says Daenerys, when Grey Worm stands next to her. He bows his head before saying, "Your Grace." Daenerys and Grey Worm both look across the ship on the other side of the deck as they see Kinvara walking their way. Kinvara is joined by a very large man we have never seen before. He stands well over 6 feet tall, with skin as black as Drogon and hair as white as snow. On his face and forehead are tattoos of red and orange flames. The black man's red scarlet robe has satin orange flames on it as well. In his right hand is a 6-foot iron staff with a dragon's head on the end of it. He looks spectacular in a frightening kind of way. As they approach Dany and Grey Worm, Kinvara says, "Your Grace, I would like you to meet Makaro." As he looks at Dany with his shining dark eyes, he says in his deep voice, "The Lord of Light has shown me your worth. Every night in my fires I glimpse the glory that awaits you." Kinvara then reaches out and grabs Grey Worm by his arm. As she squeezes his muscles, she says, "I hope you and your men are ready, because darkness awaits us." "We are," says Grey Worm. He looks in Dany's eyes and says, "You still haven't said who we will be fighting." Kinvara smiles. Then she says, "Why don't I show you instead?" She reaches down and grabs his hand. Grey Worm follows her over to a burning brazier in the center of the ship. Look into R'hllor's great fire, and behold everything that is ready to strike us down. The red and orange flames reflect in Grey Worm's eyes. His mouth hangs open as he stares into the fire in disbelief. After a few more moments of watching, a sudden anger flashes across his face. Grey Worm slams the brazier down, spilling hot embers all over the deck of the ship. We see 3 slave soldiers of the Fiery Hand rush over and begin stomping on the embers before the wooden ship catches fire. With a look of shock on her face, Dany says, "What happened? What did you see?" "Whatever it was, best believe you will see it again," says Makaro. Grey Worm looks at Dany. His eyes are now filled with hatred. The scene ends after he says, "I saw Jon Snow. He was riding on the back of Drogon." In the following scene, we are back in Winterfell. Ghost, Jon, Tormund, Helen Reed, and the Stark guardsmen emerge from below the castle. There is so much activity in the courtyard, no one even notices them at first. Jon can't help but crack a smile when he sees how alive the castle is again. There are men drilling with wood and steel swords in the yard. There are cooks tending their vegetables in the glass garden. There's restless dogs running back and forth in the kennels. And there's even some women gossiping beside the washing well. It almost made him feel at home again, but he remembers what Helen Reed said. They cannot stay here for long. Suddenly, he hears a surprised voice from up above. "Jon, is that you?" Sansa, who is followed by Maester Walkan, rushes down the stairs to greet him. The yard grows silent, and everyone watches as Jon and Sansa embrace each other. "What happened?" asks Sansa. "Why did you leave Castle Black?" Jon looks at her with a bit of sadness in his eyes. He says, "We have a lot to discuss." He then looks around the yard, at all the watchful eyes staring back at him. Sansa finally notices everyone is looking at them. The silence ends, and everyone immediately goes back to work now that they have Queen Sansa's attention. "Maybe we should go speak in the Godswood," says Jon. As they begin walking, Ghost darts out in front of them. When they reach the Godswood, Ghost is already there, sniffing the ground around the weirwood. Jon notices that right away, but he focuses on the task at hand. "Your Grace, I would like you to meet Lord Howland Reed." Jon steps aside, while Howland Reed bows his head. "You were friends with my father," says Sansa. "I remember hearing stories about you when I was younger." Howland Reed smiles, then says, "I was, Your Grace. Your father was a great man. It would be an honor for me to serve his children." "What brings you all this way?" asks Sansa. "Why are you with Jon? Did you join the Night's Watch?" "No, Your Grace," says Lord Howland. "We're here because of your brother Bran. He's in grave danger. Jon has agreed to help me save him, or so we hope." Sansa's eyes fill with fear as she looks over at Jon. "What does he mean?" asks Sansa. "Why would Bran be in grave danger? Our enemies have been defeated. He is surrounded by soldiers and guards day and night. I made sure of that myself. I left behind some of our own household guard. Brienne joined his Kingsguard, not mine. Who would harm him? There are things in this world that are difficult to explain, says Howland Reed. Bran isn't the same brother you grew up with anymore. I know, says Sansa. Bran said the exact same thing to me when he said he was the three-eyed raven. I need you to explain it to me. Help me understand, so I can help you. The children of the forest did not disappear, says Howland Reed. Your brother met some of them in a cave beyond the wall. They did everything they could to help him defeat the Night King, but it wasn't enough to end the Great War. There are more children of the forest hiding out in the south on the Isle of Faces. They were helping the Night King and his army of the dead all along. They are still working against us as we speak, and they have now entered your brother's mind. He will continue to lose more and more of himself the longer he stays in the south. Not only is your brother in danger, but so is everyone else around him. Sansa is befuddled. She says, what do they want? There is a long moment of silence before Howland Reed says, Valar Morghulis, your grace. All men must die. We're living on their lands, and they will do everything in their power to get them back. We have to get Bran out of King's Landing before it's too late. How do we know Bran hasn't left King's Landing already? How do we know Bran isn't with the children of the forest right now? Asks Sansa. There's only one way to find out, says Lord Howland Reed. He looks in Jon's eyes, then looks at the weirwood, and nods his head in its direction. You were given the bowl of weirwood seeds for a reason, Jon Snow. Go set your hand on its face. Look through its eyes, and tell us what you see. Jon slowly looks over at the white and red weirwood. He remembers what happened when he leaned his head against one and fell asleep. He can see Ghost is still underneath it, sniffing around at the ground. He walks over next to him, then kneels down. This is very reminiscent of when Jon knelt in front of the weirwood beyond the wall when he said his Night's Watch vows. He takes in a deep breath, then lays his hand over the face. His head snaps back, and his eyes roll in his head. He's immediately thrown into a vision. The first thing Jon sees is a massive weirwood, standing taller than any of the other ones he's ever seen before. It's on an island, surrounded by a blue lake. A very large shadow soars over the water, and right behind that seems to be another very large shadow. He sees 7 children of the forest standing in a circle on a beach. Right behind them, above the rocks, is a castle. It looks a lot like Dragonstone. He can see Bran, sitting in a weirwood throne like the one in the Three-Eyed Raven's cave. Bran's eyes are rolled back in his head. He can see Bronn arguing with 3 Stark guardsmen on a balcony overlooking a city. He then sees Bronn falling from that balcony. He sees Grey Worm standing in front of him. He looks enraged. Now he sees the streets of King's Landing, right where the old Septa Baelor used to sit. Bran is sitting there in his wheelchair. Brienne, Podrick, and Lord Tyrion Lannister are there as well. But before he can make out everything that's happening, he snaps out of the visions. Jon's hand drops from the weirwood's face. He's now gasping for breath. Everyone rushes over to him. Howland Reed bends down and throws an arm over his shoulder. Are you okay? Asks Lord Howland. Jon looks around at his surroundings, remembering where he is. He slowly controls his breathing, then says, I'm fine. Help me stand up. Howland Reed and Tormund Giantsbane help Jon back on his feet. Sansa looks a bit stunned. She's never seen anything like this before. Are you able to tell us what you saw? Says Howland Reed. Yes, says Jon. I did see Bran. He's still in King's Landing. Good, says Howland Reed. We still have time. I don't think we have much time, Jon says doubtfully. Bran had his Master of Coin thrown from his balcony. Why? Says Sansa. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know, says Jon, but I think he's trying to wipe out his entire small council. Sansa is even more shocked than before. She says, what makes you say that, Jon? What else did you see? The sound of grief comes from Jon's voice when he says, Lord Tyrion Lannister has been arrested. I saw him kneeling over the executioner's block. Howland Reed immediately stands back up when he hears this. He says, we must leave now. Everyone begins leaving the Godswood, but Jon stops them before they make another step. That's not all, Jon says loudly. I also saw Brienne and Podrick. They were standing right behind Lord Tyrion. There is dread written all over Sansa's face. After a moment of silence, Sansa nervously says, what happened, Jon? The scene ends after he says, they had nooses around their necks. In the final scene of this episode, we go back inside the Red Keep of King's Landing. We're in King Bran Stark's chambers. On one side of the room, Bran is sitting there, surrounded by his new sworn brothers of the Kingsguard. On the other side of the room, Brienne and Podrick are standing there, searching for answers. "Is everything alright, Your Grace?" asks Brienne. In a flat voice, Bran says, "What would make you think something was wrong?" "Well, something is wrong," says Brienne. "You threw Samwell's book into the fire. I know I don't know you that well, but that's not like you. Sir Bronn of Highgarden fell from your balcony. There is a bloody dead man lying in the old throne room. Lord Tyrion seems to be missing, and his chambers looked as if they have been ransacked. I'm just trying to understand what is happening around here." Bran stares at her and looks right through her with his unsympathetic eyes. He says, "It sounds like there is a ghost inside the Red Keep." Brienne stands her ground, not allowing Bran or his men to frighten her. Maybe it was a ghost, or maybe it was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Where is Lord Tyrion? Bran cracks a thin smile before saying, "He's sitting in the Black Cells. He has been charged for the murder of Sir Bronn." "This is nonsense," shouts Brienne. "I was with Lord Tyrion in his chambers when we heard the scream. We ran outside together. We discovered Bronn's lifeless body laying on the street below your balcony together. I know for a fact Tyrion Lannister did not do this." Bran stops smiling. One of his new Kingsguard members says Lady Brienne cannot be trusted, Your Grace. She has always favored the Lannisters. Rumor has it, she has even laid with a Lannister. Brienne looks at the man with eyes as cold as ice. She says, "I have no love for the Lannisters." "Deny it all you want," says Bran. "I've seen it myself. That sword says you're a liar. Did you know that sword was made from my family's ancestral sword after the Lannisters' bastard seed butchered my father?" Bran now shifts his focus over to Sir Podrick. He says, "You're a lion as well. You was once the squire for Lord Tyrion Lannister, and now you stand here beside another. What should I call you anyways, Lady Brienne? A lion in sheep's clothing?" Brienne looks into Bran's soulless eyes, then says, "Whatever treachery you think I may have done, Sir Podrick had nothing to do with it." "That's enough," says the man of the Kingsguard. "I think they both should hang, Your Grace." In a low voice, Bran says, "Who are you loyal to, Lady Brienne? Who are you sworn to guard with your life? Lord Tyrion of House Lannister, or your king? You must choose here and now. Which house does that Valyrian steel really fight for?" "What are you asking of me, Your Grace?" asks Brienne. After a few moments of silence, Bran says, "Lord Tyrion is to be executed for the charge of murder. I want the lion's head mounted on my wall. Will you take it for your king, or die next to him? You must choose. Take that sword and slay the imp, or be hanged for a betrayer. The sword or the noose." Brienne's eyes fill up with water. If she wasn't frightened before, she is now. Finally, Brienne sucks in a ragged breath and says, "I will not make that choice." There was another long silence after this. Bran's new Kingsguard members look at each other in disbelief. This episode ends after Bran says, "Hang them."